It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. A week-long cruise to the Caribbean. Just me and the open sea. I've been saving for this for years, imagining sunny afternoons on the deck and quiet evenings under the stars. But from the moment I boarded the ship, something felt wrong. It started small, almost unnoticeable. I first saw him at check-in. He was a tall man in a navy jacket, standing just behind me in line. He had on sunglasses, odd since we were indoors, and he held no luggage. I didn't think much of it then. Ships are crowded, and we were all eager to set sail. By the first evening, I was settled into my small cabin when I saw him again, standing at the far end of the dining hall. He didn't eat, didn't speak, just stared. He was always just far enough away to seem accidental, but close enough that I noticed. I brushed it off as paranoia. I was alone, and maybe I was making too much of it. After all, thousands of people were on this ship. But the second night, it escalated. I'd spent the day lounging by the pool and wandering through the shops. When I got back to my cabin that night, I noticed something was off. My cabin door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it. I was franticking, but the room was empty, and nothing seemed out of place. I chalked it up to forgetfulness, locked the door carefully as time, and went back to sleep. At 2:37 in the morning, I woke to a noise. A soft, scraping sound coming from the hallway outside my cabin door. My skin prickled as I sat up in bed, holding my breath, and then the sound stopped. Then, through the thin peephole, I saw him. The man in the navy jacket stood directly outside my door. His face was obscured by shadows. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, watching. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. The next morning, I went to the front desk and told them about the man. "Do you know him?" I said, describing his jacket and sunglasses. The staff member frowned, checking the passenger list. "There's no one with that description aboard, ma'am." My stomach dropped. "He was standing outside my room last night. He's been following me ever since I got here." "I'll have security check it out," she said politely, though I could tell she thought I was overreacting. That evening, I avoided my cabin as long as I could, staying with the crowds near the bar. Finally, exhausted, I returned to my room around midnight. The door was ajar. Inside, the lights flickered as I stepped in. My suitcase was open, my clothes tossed across the floor, and there, on my bed, was a single item: the man's sunglasses. I turned to run, straight into him. He stood in the doorway, blocking my escape, his face still obscured by shadows. But this time, I could hear him breathing, slow, deep breaths. I backed away as he stepped closer, and then the lights went out. I scrambled for the lamp or the door, anything, but the cabin was pitch black. Then, out of the darkness, I heard his voice. "You can't leave." I don't remember screaming, but I must have. The next thing I knew, security was pulling me out of my cabin. The lights were back on, and the man was gone. They searched the entire cruise ship top to bottom. No trace of him, no sunglasses, no footprints, nothing. It was like he never even boarded. The cruise staff apologized profusely, offering me a new cabin and a free drink instead. as if that could erase what just happened. I spent the last 2 days of the cruise in a constant state of paranoia, checking over my shoulder at every turn. When we docked, I was the first one off the ship. I rushed through customs, out of the terminal, desperate to leave it all behind. But as I climbed into a taxi, I glanced toward the crowd of passengers disembarking. There, among the sea of faces, he stood, his sunglasses back on, his navy jacket pristine. He was smiling. And that's when I realized this wasn't over. I never saw him again after that day, but the fear followed me long after I returned home. I slept with my doors locked, windows bolted, yet sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, I hear soft footsteps outside my apartment door, followed by a slow, deep breath, and I know he's still watching. I had always loved the idea of a cruise, adventure and relaxation all in one. I was traveling solo, and it felt freeing to wander wherever I wanted without anyone's agenda. When we docked at a small, isolated island, one of those hidden gems, the crew hyped up. I couldn't wait to explore. The excursion was simple. A guided tour through the lush jungle followed by time on a secluded beach. Our group was small, just a dozen passengers, and our guide, an older local man with weathered skin and a thick accent, led us deep into the island's green maze. The air was heavy and still, broken only by the hum of insects and the distant crash of waves. As we walked, the guide stopped often, pointing out plants and ancient markings carved into rocks. At one point, he leaned in close to me and said quietly, "The island remembers." I laughed nervously, unsure what he just meant. I shrugged it off, and when we finally reached the beach, it was stunning. Pure white sand and water so blue and so clear, it didn't even seem real. The guide gave us an hour to relax and wandered off to collect some driftwood. Everyone spread out, sunbathing or swimming. I chose to walk along the shoreline, letting the waves lap at my ankles. And that's when I saw it. Just beyond a small rock outcropping, there was a path, hidden, almost swallowed by the jungle. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced back at the others. No one noticed me slip away. The path led to a clearing. At its center was a stone structure, ancient and crumbling, like something from a lost civilization. The carvings on its surface matched those the guide had pointed out earlier, but these were darker. Faces twisted in agony, eyes wide with fear. I felt like I shouldn't be there, but I couldn't turn away. I stepped closer, and a chill swept through the air. It felt suddenly wrong, like the island was watching me. The sky dimmed, the sounds of the beach disappeared, and an eerie stillness settled over everything. Then, from inside the stone structure, I heard a voice. It was faint, but familiar. Someone was calling my name. "Hello?" The voice repeated it, a little louder this time, like an echo. It sounded like my mother, though that was impossible. She'd been dead for years. My chest tightened as I edged closer to the structure, trying to see inside. "Come in," the voice whispered. My vision blurred, and I felt dizzy, as though something was pulling me forward. I don't know how long I stood there, staring, unable to move or think. Finally, after some time, A distant shout snapped me out of it. "Hey!" I turned sharply. It was the tour guide, waving his arms frantically from the beach, shouting something I couldn't hear. The spell broke, and I ran back toward him, my heart pounding. "You wandered too far," he scolded when I reached him, his face pale. "Never go alone on this island." I didn't tell him about the voice. I couldn't explain it. By the time we returned to the beach, the group was packing up. I shook off the unease, convinced it was all just in my head. We boarded the small boat that would take us back to the cruise ship. I felt relieved, ready to put the island behind me. But as we neared the ship, my stomach dropped. It was moving. The ship was leaving. I stared in shock, my mind racing. I must have lost track of time on the island. The guide shouted into his radio, but there was no answer. The boat driver pushed the engine hard, but it was way too late. The massive ship pulled away, disappearing into the horizon. The guide told us the ship couldn't turn back. "They will send another boat for you tomorrow," he assured us. "You'll be safe here tonight." Safe? I didn't feel safe. We were all stranded here. Me, the guide, and a handful of other passengers on an island that felt alive. Night fell quickly. The beach grew dark, the jungle beyond it a wall of shadows. We built a small fire, and everyone sat close, whispering nervously. The guide stayed silent, staring out at the trees. That's when I saw movement. At the edge of the jungle, just beyond the firelight, figures were standing, watching us. Their bodies were impossibly still, their faces obscured by darkness. I blinked, and they were gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered to the guy next to me. "See what?" they said, looking around confused. The guide must have noticed my fear. He leaned in close, his voice barely audible. "The island remembers." The night stretched on endlessly. I swear I heard voices in the dark, whispering my name, coming from the jungle and the waves around me. I didn't sleep. None of us did. At dawn, another boat arrived, sent by the cruise line. We climbed aboard in silence, too exhausted and shaken to speak. I glanced back at the island as we pulled away, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing on the shore, someone wearing my face. We rejoined the cruise ship later that day. The staff apologized, but no one believed me when I told them about the figures in the jungle, the voices, the pull of that stone structure. The rest of the trip passed in a blur, but something stayed with me. I still hear the voice sometimes, soft, distant, calling my name. And I know that part of me never really left that island. I'd always dreamed of going on a cruise. There's something magical about being surrounded by endless water. No land in sight, just you and the open sea. But after this trip, I'll never step foot on a cruise ship ever again. It started on the second night. I was traveling alone, and my cabin was tucked away on one of the lower decks. Quiet, private. I liked it at first, but later that night, after a long day of lounging and overeating at the buffet, I returned my cabin to sleep. It was around 4 a.m., and I woke up to a faint knocking sound. I assumed someone had gotten lost after a long night at the bar. I ignored it and rolled over. But it didn't stop. The knocking continued for minutes. I groaned, pulling on a sweater, and swung open my door. The hallway was empty. I peered left, then right. There was no one in sight. The air felt strangely cold for a closed-off hallway. With a chill running down my spine, I locked the door and crawled back into bed. But just as I started drifting off, I heard it again. It was louder this time, like it was coming from inside the cabin. I sat up in the dark, heart pounding. My eyes darted to the bathroom door. It was closed, but I could have sworn I heard movement from behind it. A soft shuffle. I didn't want to check, but I couldn't ignore it. Slowly, I crept toward the door and pushed it open. The bathroom was empty. My skin prickled as I backed out into the main room, my breaths coming in and out, fast. I knew I'd locked the cabin door. I knew I was alone. So why did I feel like I wasn't? The next morning, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Maybe exhaustion or too much rich food. I spent the day surrounded by people, forcing myself to relax. That night, though, the knocking came again. I woke up at exactly 4 a.m., the same time as the previous night. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I didn't open the door. I just sat frozen in bed, listening as it grew louder. Suddenly, the knocking stopped, and I heard footsteps moving inside my room, just a few feet away from my bed. I couldn't see anyone in the dark, but I felt someone there. A weight pressed on my chest, and the air turned icy. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice shaking. No answer, just silence. Then the footsteps moved toward the door. I watched, paralyzed, as the door unlocked itself with a slow click and creaked open. The hallway light spilled into the cabin, and for the briefest moment, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, just a shadow of a person, tall and unmoving. Then the door shut. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I went straight to the front desk, demanding they check the security cameras. I had to know if someone was sneaking into my room. The staff looked concerned but confused. After some searching, they sat me down and said, "Ma'am, we've checked the cameras. No one entered or exited your cabin all night." I stared at them, feeling like I was losing my mind. "What about the knocking? The footsteps?" The staff exchanged a glance. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming, ma'am?" I left, angry and shaken. I avoided my cabin as much as I could that day, spending the evening in the crowded dining hall. But eventually, I had to go back. That night, I stayed awake, sitting up with every light on in the cabin. I wouldn't let this happen again. But as the hours passed, exhaustion got the better of me. At exactly 4 a.m., I woke up with a jolt. The lights were off, and someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't see their face, just a silhouette, completely still like a statue. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then the figure tilted its head slowly, like it was watching me. I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the cabin window. I was lying on the floor, the sheets from the bed tangled around me. The door was locked, but something was different. All of my belongings had been moved, my suitcase overturned, my clothes strewn across the room. But the strangest thing, my cabin key card was missing. I ran to the front desk again, frantic, demanding answers. This time, a manager pulled me aside. "We don't normally talk about this, but you're not the first guest to report strange occurrences in that cabin." What do you mean? Years ago, a passenger disappeared from that very room. A man traveling alone. He was last seen wandering the hallways late at night. They searched the entire ship, but he was never found. I stared at him, my blood running cold. And the knocking? He hesitated. Other guests have also heard it too. Always at 4 a.m. I demanded to change cabins. I spent the rest of the cruise ship sleeping with the lights on, my back pressed against the wall. When the trip ended, I practically ran off the ship. I never told anyone what happened. Not because I didn't want to, but because I still couldn't explain it. To this day, I wake up at 4 a.m. sometimes, heart pounding, convinced I hear slow knocking sounds at my bedroom door. I don't know what I encountered on that ship, but I'm certain of one thing. Some passengers never leave a cruise ship.